Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Today I am joined by the host and creator of the Bright Side of Life podcast, Melissa Bright. Her podcast focuses on talking with people that have had struggles and pain in their life and how they've found their path back to the bright side, whatever that means to them. Melissa believes that happiness and looking on the bright side is all about mindset, and these stories navigate and discuss people's successful journeys to happiness. And they're just such a wonderful dose of inspiration. I've listened to a few podcasts and I definitely highly recommend it. I mean, there are deep and personal stories, but hearing how people come through it on the other side is just beautiful and just heartwarming and tearful and all the feels. Hashtag all the feels. So Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much. And podcaster to podcaster, I'm wondering who or what inspired you to become a podcaster?
Oh, yes. Who inspired me to be a podcaster was Mr. Jay Shetty from his podcast On Purpose. His podcast is absolutely incredible. It's all about spreading wisdom and making wisdom go viral. And he has great guests on his show. Then he has solo episodes kind of teaching people just about certain things, whether it's relationship tips or breaking generational like cycles. I mean, he runs the gamut in different categories, and I've just learned so much from his podcast. And the number one thing that made me start a podcast was he had two people on his podcast, Madonna, it's not Madonna the singer, she's another lady, and then Deborah Messing. And either one of those two ladies, I obviously didn't see the video, so I don't know which one was talking, but she was describing how she could find her purpose. And when she described that, she would say, I want people to think about like what makes their heart hurt whenever they look out into the world. When you see that and whatever it is that makes your heart hurt, then you ask yourself, what could I do to make the world better? Like, how could I make a change? And she's like, and when I asked myself that question, my purpose became really clear. And so I was like, that's the formula. That's what I got to do to find my purpose. And just very simply or very quickly, that's kind of how I found my purpose. Was I asked myself, what makes my heart hurt? And that was people feeling alone in their struggles. How am I going to change that? I'm going to change that by having a podcast and have deep conversations with people.
Yeah. And I imagine that especially over this last year with the way things were, people being in lockdown, there was a lot more loneliness, a lot more vulnerability going on in the world. Do you find that people tuned in more because they were searching for some more connection?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I really did when I started my podcast, it's kind of twofold, is I started opening up about my mental health. I honestly didn't talk much about my mental health prior to me starting my podcast, but I said if I was going to do this and post on social media, then I also needed to open up about my depression, anxiety, self-worth issues, so on and so forth. And I feel with me finally opening up about my stuff, opening up about me allowed people the space for them to kind of come to me and open up to me, which I feel like also translated in, well, let me listen to some of the guests that she has. Let me listen to the stories that she's doing. And I've had several people since then message me and tell me that what I'm doing and the message that I'm sending out is really inspiring or helping them kind of come forth and address their own mental health battle also. So it's been very, very rewarding.
That's great. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know about me, I work in, a therapeutic field. I'm a board certified music therapist, and so seeing someone such as yourself being transparent about your mental health to a level that you feel comfortable, because obviously everyone's got a comfort level with that. I
Yeah.
think that helps break the stigmas. It breaks what maybe some people may be ashamed, or maybe there's stereotypes surrounding certain things regarding mental health. And I think perhaps it might inspire someone to seek help, or inspire someone to reevaluate their life goals, or whatever it is that they need to do,
Yeah.
because there's nothing wrong with seeking therapy. But I think a lot of people, especially the older generations, they were taught that it was secretive and shameful. And I think people, and again, I mean, that's their own thing, there's no judgment. But I think that as we move forward as a culture, and as we grow, it's so important to, even if someone doesn't want to say, hey, I go to therapy, there's nothing wrong with at least saying there's nothing wrong with going to therapy. Like,
Right.
whether they want to talk about it or not, there's nothing wrong with seeking help.
It's amazing. And I feel like everybody needs to have that person. My daughter started therapy at 15 years old, and that gave her another adult that she could talk to besides me, because she doesn't always want to run to mom when she was 15 years old. It's a lot better for her to have that person when she did. So, and she's actually going to school to be a therapist now. That's how much it impacted her.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
When did you first decide on communications and podcasting? Like, did you major in anything related to that when you were in school?
Funny story. I originally wanted to be a news broadcaster when I went to college. That's exactly, I went to a school in St. Louis that was pretty well known for their broadcasting program. And then very quickly, I got into, when I was in the program, I realized that this wasn't my cup of tea, that I didn't really have that hard shell that I could ask people these really hard questions and then just walk away and just go into my van and move on from that story. I'm just too sensitive for that. And so I was like, well, maybe broadcasting really isn't for me. So I knew also I kind of went to different radio stations and sat in with people. This was when I was younger, like 2021. And so I really, really always enjoyed that. I just didn't know at what capacity where I was going to be. Really enjoy video editing. I've dabbled in video editing. And then finally last year, kind of when COVID hit, was a time that was really uncomfortable for me. Before I was a travel agent, nobody was traveling last year. So it was like, what can I do? I myself had listened to tons of podcasts before, all the way from Joe Rogan to Jay Shetty, and in between all the true crime podcasts, love them all. I knew that podcasting was a platform that I wanted to do, but I had no background in interviewing people, no background in any of this. But I just kind of gave it a shot and see where it was going to take me.
Yeah, no, I understand. I went to school for music and music therapy, and other than taking a speech class in undergrad, I didn't have any experience in communications, mass communications, but I love to talk and I love to listen. So
Right. Exactly. So it comes natural, but it's like sometimes it's like, do we need that class to teach us how to be able to talk and how to be able to listen? Because that was my thing, is when I asked myself what made my heart hurt, or what I'm good at, I was like, I'm really good at asking people deep conversational questions. I don't like on the surface questions like, oh, how's your day? I want to ask, like, why is it that you behave this way? Or what makes you your passion? Why music therapy? And you probably have a deep like passion behind why you chose music therapy. And because that's where we're really going to connect. We're not going to connect on talking about the weather, right? Like,
mhm.
it's not where we're going to connect at. So yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
That's okay. Tangents are nice.
yeah.
So you mentioned a few podcasts that, of course, inspired you and that you enjoy, but are there any others that really catch your ear, so to speak?
Yeah, so my boyfriend's been listening to Joe Rogan for like 3 or 4 years now, and I personally do enjoy Joe Rogan also. Some of the stuff is like really, really educational to me, stuff that I've obviously never heard of. It's a good pastime. Him and I travel a lot, like when we go camping in our RV, so we usually always listening to Joe Rogan, and I absolutely love it. And true crime podcast, I haven't listened to as many lately, but I've listened to tons and tons, from Dr. Death to Culpable to I love true crime anything. I could watch the true crime stuff on TV also. So those podcasts, I'm trying to think of any other ones. I was pretty dedicated to listening to Jay Shetty though. I really listened to him a lot. And then like I said, Joe Rogan, 3-hour podcast. That's kind of all you have time for in your day. So those are the ones that I listen to.
Are there any podcasts that you would love to be a guest on?
Well, my dream is to be on Jay Shetty's podcast one day when I'm making like big changes in the world. He's been on my number one. I'd love to be on his podcast, and I'd love to have him on my podcast. I don't have that answer, and I'm kind of like, maybe you should have this answer. Maybe you should see certain podcasts. You know, like I've been on smaller podcasts, but like I usually go big.
Mhm.
So I'm like, okay, who's big podcast? Where can I get to? Because then I just want to have a goal. So that doesn't really answer your question, but it's something that I need to like start thinking about. Like, hey, what's your 3-year plan when you're a bigger podcaster? Who do you want to go on?
And that actually rolls into my next question, which is, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, 5 years. Ooh, if I could have it my way, I would be a huge podcaster getting millions of downloads all the time. I would have sponsorships, and I would be making a lot of money from sponsorships that I believe in, that align with my brand, that I've personally used their service, product, whatever it is. I could wake up every day and have really good conversations with people. I thoroughly enjoy it. And if I could do this all day, every day for a job and get paid for it, absolutely. So I would say that's my 5-year plan. This is what I want to be doing. Put it out in the universe now, right?
Yes. And it seems like you're on the right step. I mean, you've got a beautiful website, you've got engaging guests, heartwarming stories, your download numbers and stats from what I've seen are fantastic for such a younger podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And of course, yellow. I love it. I love that
Yellow,
color.
I know. I love yellow too. I love it. I love it. And I didn't like before this, whenever he made my cover art, the gentleman that made my cover art, and it was all yellow, I just fell in love. It was everything that like I encompassed. Now I had a photographer actually take the picture, but then I had a graphic designer create the title and the actual cover art. And I fell in love. It was like it was meant to be. So now it's like yellow everything.
And it just works so well with your title and the fact that your last name is Bright. I mean,
Yeah.
you were basically born to do this podcast.
I was. See, that's what I'm saying. Exactly.
Written in the stars.
Yep.
On a more serious note, did you have any internal or external barriers to reaching this point, to starting a podcast and to getting to where you are at this point?
Yeah. Oh, of course, there's always internal and exterior barriers. The internal was just asking myself, could I really do this? I had no experience to being a podcaster, to interviewing people before. Self-doubt kind of set in, but I researched a lot. I researched how to do interviews. One thing that I really had to learn how to do was let go of my perfectionism. I actually started therapy right around the same time that I started my podcast, which I think was also a blessing in disguise. And very early on in my therapy, we discovered that I most definitely was a perfectionist, and I attach all my self-worth to all of my achievements. And sometimes it's a very good thing, because usually perfectionists, like, they're very goal driven, but at the same time, if they don't achieve those goals, then they feel like they're the scum of the earth, and then it's just bad. So we learned that. And so going into my first episode, not knowing who this person was, she was a complete stranger, never talked to her until I pressed the record button. I kind of told myself, Melissa, you're gonna probably suck. It's probably not going to be that great, but that's okay. You're not supposed to be Katie Couric or Oprah Winfrey on your very first interview. So with doing that, letting go of that perfectionism has made it a lot easier. It sometimes still creeps up time to time, because podcasting is very hard to get validation from people. It's not like they listen and then all immediately they message you and they're like, hey, great episode. Usually not often. And so sometimes you're like, man, is this resonating with people? Am I doing a good thing? Is it helping people? That can sometimes, you just question your work and if you're creating value and providing value for people. External struggles, I think that would be the external struggle, is just not, of course, we shouldn't seek outside validation, but you need something kind of like a test group to tell you, hey, this is great, or hey, maybe you should go back to selling travel. And so trying to get that feedback can sometimes be really hard. And I'm like, is it hard because my podcast sucks and nobody wants to tell me? Or and I know with being in Facebook or podcast Facebook groups that a lot of people struggle with getting that feedback and stuff. So I know I'm not the only one, but it doesn't make it any easier.
In terms of getting feedback, I think people are just very busy.
Yeah.
And, unless you directly say, like, here's the link, it's hard to dig around and figure out where to leave a review if you wanted to leave a review for some things. Unless it's like an Amazon product or something.
Right. Oh, it's right there. It's very obvious. Yeah, but it is hard and people are busy I'm guilty of it too. People want you to vote on something or do something. And it's like, if you're at a restaurant and scrolling through your phone, you're probably not going to vote for that person right then and there. And then it gets lost and you don't do it. So I totally get it. It's just really hard to cut through all that noise.
Mm-hmm. If you feel comfortable sharing, what are some of your short-term and long-term goals for your podcast?
Long-term goal is obviously to monetize my podcast. And I really want to start I never want to be desperate for guests. This is like my life. This is what I get to do every day. And the people that I have on my podcast they're on my podcast for a reason, because they spoke to me, they inspired me, their message is something that I want my audience to hear. And I just lost my train of thought. Oh, so finding there are bigger guests that I want to have on. Of course, Jay Shetty. I can't say it enough. I'm just keep putting it out in the universe. Finding, bigger authors or people that inspire me. I went so as far as saying I wanted to have Paris Hilton on my podcast because of everything that she went through as a child and her school and all the trauma that she went through that just came out last year. And I was like, wow, like this is incredible. So I really have big goals like that, not necessarily to always go talking to celebrities or something, but anybody that's inspired me, whether you're famous or not, or you're just the guy down the street that did something amazing. My short-term goals, just to get, I don't want to say more organized, but more of a flow. I feel like I'm getting in the flow now of like, okay, you record, you edit, but all your social stuff, I like social media stuff. I'm trying to get like exactly the checklist each time. So it just starts coming faster because I am myself. I do it all, produce, edit, everything. And that can be time consuming. Yeah. And aside from my own podcast, one of my goals is to be a guest on more podcasts, so I was really happy when you asked me to be a guest on yours. That's one of my goals too, is finding the time to be on other people's podcasts.
Right. And I'm grateful that you're here. It's great to connect with other podcasters. And especially like for me, I find your podcast inspiring and what you do inspiring. And it reminded me of the Humans of New York, where they go and they find average people and suss out these just amazing stories.
Right. Exactly. Because that's when I first started out, I'm like, I'm not going for the celebrities. I'm going for Susie down the street that just lost her baby. Like those are the people I want to talk to, and I want to hear how she healed from that,
Mm-hmm.
And the conversations have just been incredible.
If you could do any other creative pursuit other than podcasting, what would it be?
Ooh, I don't even want to say I enjoy writing, but I really enjoyed writing poems. I like writing. I like getting emotions out that way in writing. I almost thought for a while I wanted to be a singer-songwriter because I can't sing, but singer-songwriter, I was like, let's put some poems into some songs and sell them to some damn singers. I really, really like poems and all that stuff. So that would be it. Or it would be forever I wanted to work for Pandora, just listening to music over and over. I mean, music was like my life. And I say was, it's because I'm so busy now. I don't get to listen and like download a million songs these days. But just like I wanted to be the person at Pandora that would this song goes in this category with this playlist and all that. Like, I wanted to be paid to listen to music. So if I could do that or write something, write some kind, that's what I would be doing.
Very cool. Very cool. So obviously, you feature stories where you talk about people who've healed and how they've pulled themselves out of dark spots. Are there any particular times in your life that you're willing to share that, or even just one moment that you feel has been so inspiring in your own life and sort of pivotal?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest ones, right, is my current life right now. I feel like whenever I started my podcast is when Melissa Bright really became her true self. I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of self-reflecting. I've done a lot of talking with my boyfriend and listening to him. I come from a background of a lot of trauma, baggage, so on and so forth, and that was kind of all bottled up inside me, and I was just this package, but the package didn't always show that to other people. But my boyfriend would see this angry package and this impatient package. So now that I have started this podcast, my life, and me opening up about my vulnerabilities and my childhood and all these things, I feel like I'm finally living my true self, and I'm attracting the people that are supposed to be in my life and all those things. So this time right now really means a lot to me. I've struggled a lot with self-worth, self-doubt, self-love, lost my mom at 25, just lost my dad. So when you feel abandoned as a little kid, well, even at the age of 25, it's really hard. You're just kind of going in life by yourself and like, am I doing the right thing? Am I not? So then I almost like hated myself because I didn't have anybody to like reassure me that things were good. But now with all my therapy and healing, my life right now is extremely meaningful to me because I feel like I'm finally living my true who I'm supposed to be. And it feels really good. Feels really, really good.
That's great. That's great. And I'm so glad to know that you've reached that point.
Yeah. And I am too. And it's weird, like, you hear people say it, like, oh, I stepped into my true light, and you'll see quotes, and like until you really get it or until you do, it might not make sense. Like, or maybe you think that you are, but it's like, I don't know. It's just like as easy as a puzzle piece clicking together. It just all makes sense. And you're just like, yeah, this is who I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to be doing, what I'm supposed to be saying, who I'm supposed to be interacting with. It all just comes together.
I understand that. Yeah. I mean, when I discovered that I wanted to go and major in music therapy and I got into the program, I was like, yep, this is it. This is my
Yeah.
purpose in life. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You just know. You just know, and it's incredible.
What has been one of the biggest challenges for you recently as a podcaster?
The unknown. The unknown of, am I going to be in the same spot per se in 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, a year? Am I going to be sitting at the same, not same download numbers, but the same averages, or is there going to be a time that like really takes off, or is what I'm doing right now paying off for where I want to be, let's say in 5 years? Sometimes it's hard to like trust yourself, and then other times I'm like, no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think that is the biggest struggle for me. Mine is always a mindset thing. My struggles aren't like, oh, what kind of podcasting equipment or editing. Mine's always the emotional mindset struggles that I got to get over. So yeah, just wondering if this is paying off, literally, if this is going to pay off.
I certainly think that if someone's doing something with the level of passion that you are, that whether it pays off from a financial aspect or not is almost a moot point because you've found your calling.
Yep. And this is also very, very true. Very, very true. And that's something I'm like, okay, if I am doing podcasting and I'm just making a little bit of money, well, that's not to say I can't do something else, but then still be doing podcasting. But if I can make it happen for both.
Yeah, there's definitely podcasters out there who I'm sure can't wait to be their own boss.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
I don't know if I could ever do that. Like I love being a music therapist too much.
Oh yeah. Yep. And I was going to tell you that when I was in college, it wasn't thesis, but we had to write a paper, and mine was going to be the effects that music has on I forgot I forgot what it was, but it was something similar to like music therapy. I mean, I'm telling you, I was like obsessed. Music like ruled my life in college, and I loved it. It's so powerful.
It is very powerful. But now I'm terribly curious, who are some of your favorite bands, or what are some things you've listened to?
I love, 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 love Counting Crows. Love Counting Crows, but I mean it goes all over the place. Like I love Tech Nine also. I can get down with some rap music. Love Tech Nine, but all the way from like 90s country to Brooks and Dunn, Trevor Hall, Tyler Childers, who's folk. I mean, I literally go, it depends on my mood and everything. So I always tell myself, like, if I had to name top five, I for sure know that Counting Crows would be in my top five. Adam's voice is just incredible. And Dave Matthews. I really like Dave Matthews Band a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Counting Crows are very, very unique. They have a very unique sound, and
oh, I know, I love it.
Yeah, it's so 90s. It's like takes me right back when I hear it on the radio.
Yep, I know, it's great.
So on the flip side, what is one of the best positives that you've had in the last year?
Oh my gosh, the best positive what it is my podcast and all the incredible people that I have got to meet, coming out of a pandemic where everybody was isolated. I had already worked from home for so long, so it wasn't like I was out in a workspace where I was talking to people all the time, and I really feel like I think I missed that a lot. I used to be a server, so I talk to people all the time. Now that I get to talk to people, complete strangers that I've never met in my entire life, some people I know, some people I've never met, and to just them opening up to me about some extremely, extremely vulnerable stories is like humbling and really tells me that I must be doing something right when people feel comfortable enough to like cry in front of me and they've never met me or share a really like deep personal thing. And it just really makes me happy. And it makes me happy to have these kind of conversations with people because this is kind of what people need. I've had so many guests tell me after they got done telling their story that it was really therapeutic and healing to them. Just telling it again, kind of reliving it. It wasn't it that it was traumatic. It felt good to talk about the death of their mother and honoring her again and getting to share the story. And that makes me feel good that they say that it's therapeutic.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you really do a great job with holding space for your guests, and that's so important. It's a fantastic concept and something that I think people should be in practice more often.
Yeah, and it's I was really scared the first time that I had a podcast episode. I mean, this lady was about to tell me that she had been sexually abused as a child and then she domestic abuse. I mean, there were tons of things and I was kind of scared like to see. Thankfully she was very well versed and she had told her story many times. So I wasn't nervous in that, but it's like sometimes I didn't know how I would react. And some beautiful things have happened. Like my friend Tim, who is a man, he started crying on my podcast, like tearing up. And he's like, damn it, I said I wasn't going to do this. And instead of me feeling uncomfortable and not knowing what to say, I just sat there, allowed him to do what he needed to do, and then just said, Tim, it's okay. I'm not judging you. You need to feel this. And that was different for me because usually I'm like, this is uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. Like, what do I say? And I didn't. I just sat there and just assured him that it was okay and he's not weak. And that really means a lot that like I'm growing as a person and I don't have to try to manipulate a situation or control it. It can just be, and you can just listen and just be there for somebody.
Mm-hmm. It's so important to just be there for people. I mean, whether it's in a very professional sense, like what you're doing with a podcast, or even just saying to our friends, like, hey, I'm here for you,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Especially after this last year, I feel
oh
like,
my goodness,
there's so many people who were struggling with isolation or job losses and so many heavy topics.
Right. And you got to listen and you got to kind of like look for cues and maybe something's off about my friend Sarah. Like maybe I should call her and check up on her and see how she's doing,
You mentioned that you've been working, you had worked from home during the pandemic and then you rolled right into the podcast, but has it affected your creative process in any way?
No, the pandemic helped my creative process. I mean, that's where I got uncomfortable last year. That's where I was depressed. I wasn't bringing in any money for our family, and I attached money to my self worth also. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And that's when I really started asking myself about the purpose. And so, like I'm saying, the pandemic was hard for a lot of people, most everybody, yes. Um, but it got me uncomfortable. And sometimes when you're uncomfortable and things don't make sense, that's when you really start to reevaluate things. And I feel like that's kind of what needed to happen. Not saying on a global level, but it made me start looking at things, and it was a blessing in disguise for me.
So you're saying the world events really pushed you out of your comfort zone so that you could find your true calling, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, if the pandemic wouldn't have happened, I would have still been selling travel. Not that I didn't enjoy selling it, but I felt like I was meant to do something to serve people in a different way. Like, I really enjoyed meaningful conversations with people, not just like, well, how many rooms do you want in your hotel room, or I'm really meant for deeper conversations. So yeah, if that wouldn't have happened, I probably would still be selling travel.
It is interesting where we end up in life, isn't it?
It is. It is. And then it's like, but if whoever you want to say, God, higher power, whatever it is, he has a plan. Somebody has a plan, and that's exactly what's supposed to happen. So I guess that's what faith's all about.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking about faith and health and wellness, what is something that you're curious to learn about right now? I know you recently did like hypnosis on a show and things like that, and you sort of explore some of those other things, but just wondering what you're curious about currently.
Yeah, I'm curious anything about mental health. I really, really want to understand whatever it is. I've read a book recently, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. That's all about like neurologically, like how the brain develops when there's trauma in a little kid's life or there's not trauma. I just really want to understand why I function the way I function. And so I enjoy having experts on my podcast to talk to them, all the way from like talk therapy experts to rapid transformational therapists, which is who I did my hypnotherapy through. I just really enjoy having those experts and really just getting a diverse education about everything.
So I'm sure it would be really hard to pick, but what is a favorite memory about your time working on the bright side of life so far?
It's my favorite memory because it's the one that sticks out to me the most. And I've told my guests this. This was a girl that I went to high school with. Hadn't seen her since high school, so 15, 20 years ago. She was a grade beneath me, so we weren't like close or anything like that. And she had came to me and said that, she was thinking about wanting to share her story on my podcast of her going through a divorce, so on and so forth. And it was my third episode. And this girl poured her absolute heart out to me, cried, and cried some more. And that was the episode that I was like, wow, like this person feels completely safe with me, telling me her story, crying in front of me. You really have something here, Melissa, and you should really be honored that people are willing to come talk to you, because it's not every day that people just walk up to somebody, or not walk up to them, but tell them their whole life story or whatever it was. And that was a really moving moment for me that said, Melissa, you might actually be really good at this, and people trust you enough to like come to you and offer to share their story. And I was crying, like I was trying to hold it together, but like her tears, and I think I listened to her crying like on the podcast, and every single time tears would like come in my eyes. Like that's how much it moved me. And she knows it, and her and I actually are close now. We had never hung out before that. After that, we wound up going to the wineries together. We hung out a couple other times, and it just has created all of these relationships that I didn't have before. Mm-hmm. So it's been incredibly, incredibly meaningful.
That's beautiful. That is.
Yeah.
it definitely sounds like you're making such a positive wave in the world. And I'm wondering, what is your personal best tip for making the world a better place?
I had to do a lot of self-reflecting on myself. And I've talked a lot about this lately on my podcast about some of my own flaws that I've had. And, sometimes the outside world doesn't see them. But my boyfriend sees them firsthand, whether, like I said before, whether it's my anger issues or me not having patience or snapping back or taking something out of context that he didn't mean it. And what's been so important for me is I have went on this journey of understanding myself, understanding why I operate the way I do. And it's not even about the question of why, but it really is what happened to you as a little kid, why your dad being really hard on you, that turned you into a perfectionist, not having patience. And so when you can understand where you come from and why you act the way you act, it's much easier to talk to people in the world because you're self-aware. But for so long I was going through life being unaware. And so when somebody would say, "Melissa, like that wasn't right," or "You're just angry," or "You just like chaos in your life," I would just say, "No, no, no." But self-reflection can be so important so you can show up as your best self because you're going to have a better impact on the world. And I'm not saying everybody in the world has issues, but there might be an area of your life that you can work on, but you got to be mindful of yourself first. And it kind of all starts with you, right? You got to start with you first before you can go out and impact the world. Because if you're having a bad day and then you go yell at the lady at McDonald's because she got your coffee wrong, are you really mad at the lady at McDonald's, or are you mad because something else is happening in your life? You got to look inward first.
Yes. One final question. In your own words, what does it mean to live a creative life?
To live a creative life, I think once again, it kind of goes back to reflecting and listening to your intuition instead of your mind. That's kind of sometimes your mind can shut you down and tell you, "No, don't try that. Don't do that. That's not going to work." And you really got to follow your heart and follow that intuition. And if it doesn't work out, at least you tried. And then you can just go on to the next thing. And that's what keeps helping me is, one episode might not be great or something, or the solo episodes might suck, but I got to try them to see if people like them, if they resonate, if they got value. So that would be my answer.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Listeners, be sure to check out Melissa Bright's podcast, The Bright Side of Life, and you can listen on all the major podcasting sites and also on her website, thebrightsideoflifepodcast.com. And as always, links will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.